I walked into the most expensive ballroom in Atlanta, ready to walk my only daughter down the aisle. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, I am sorry, but you were not invited. Go away." I did not scream. I did not beg. I simply turned around and walked out. 2 hours later, every single payment for the wedding was canceled. No me, no wedding. Before I tell you how I brought their house of cards crashing down, please like and subscribe. Now let me tell you how a father's love turned into a lesson they will never forget. My name is Thaddeus Coleman. I am 71 years old and my hands are rough like sandpaper. That is what happens when you spend 50 years laying brick and pouring concrete to build half the skyline of this city. I parked my 20-year-old Ford pickup truck around the corner from the venue because the valet took one look at my vehicle and waved me away like I was a delivery driver. I did not mind. I have never been a man who needed someone else to park his car. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I was wearing my brown suit. It was not Italian silk. It was wool, and it was 15 years old. It was the suit I wore to bury my wife Lucille. It was the only suit I owned that still felt like it had a soul. I walked toward the entrance of the Grand Millennium Hotel. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the marble floors. I saw guests arriving in Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. They looked at me with that polite confusion rich people have when they see a working man in their space. They clutched their purses a little tighter. They steered their conversations away from me. I kept my head up. I was not there for them. I was there for Jasmine. My little girl was getting married. Or at least the woman who used to be my little girl. I had not seen her in 6 months, not since she moved into the penthouse with him. Hunter. Just thinking his name made my jaw tighten. I stepped through the double mahogany doors into the pre-reception area. I was looking for a familiar face, maybe a cousin or an old neighbor, but I saw no one. The room was filled with strangers, men in tuxedos that cost more than my truck and women in gowns that barely covered their disdain. Then I saw them, standing near the entrance to the main ballroom, acting like royalty holding court. Jasmine looked breathtaking in a white dress that trailed behind her like a cloud, but her face was tight. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Beside her stood Hunter. He was tall, blonde, and wearing a suit that shimmered under the lights. He was laughing loudly at something a guest said, his hand resting possessively on Jasmine's shoulder. He looked like he owned the world. He did not know yet that he did not even own the shoes on his feet. I took a breath and stepped forward. Jasmine saw me first. Her eyes went wide, not with joy, but with pure, unadulterated panic. She whispered something to Hunter, and his head snapped toward me. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a sneer of absolute disgust. They rushed toward me, not to greet me, but to intercept me. They moved fast, like security guards spotting an intruder. "Stop right there," Ted Hunter said, his voice low and sharp. He stepped in front of me, blocking my view of the party. He did not call me Mr. Coleman. He did not call me Thaddeus. Just Ted. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my scuffed work boots that I had polished as best I could. "What do you think you are doing here?" I ignored him and looked at my daughter. "Jasmine, honey, you look beautiful. Your mother would have been so proud today." I tried to smile to show her that I was just a dad happy to see his child, but Jasmine would not meet my gaze. She was looking around frantically, checking to see if any of the VIP guests were watching. "Dad," she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "You cannot be here. We talked about this. I told you this was a black tie event. Look at you. You are wearing that old funeral suit. You look like you are here to fix the plumbing, not attend a wedding." The words hit me harder than a brick falling from a scaffold. This was the suit her mother loved. This was the suit I wore when I promised to take care of her on her deathbed. "I came to walk you down the aisle, Jasmine," I said, my voice steady despite the cracking in my heart. "I am your father." "No," Jasmine said, and she took a step back as if my poverty was contagious. "Hunter is walking me down the aisle. Or maybe one of his investors. Someone who fits the image, Dad. You do not fit. You are embarrassing us." Hunter chuckled, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Look, old man," he said, stepping closer into my personal space. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. This isn't a backyard barbecue in the hood. We have investors here, CEOs, people who matter. We can't have you wandering around looking like a charity case. It ruins the brand. Now be a good little construction worker and shuffle along." He made a shooing motion with his hand like he was dismissing a stray dog. I felt a fire ignite in my chest, a heat I hadn't felt in years. But I remembered Lucille. I remembered her asking me to be patient with Jasmine to protect her. So I swallowed the rage. I reached into the inside pocket of my brown jacket. I felt the thick envelope there. Inside was a check for $1 million, my life savings, the money I made selling the land I bought 40 years ago before this city exploded. It was supposed to be her freedom fund, a way for her to start her own business, to not be dependent on this man standing in front of me. "I have something for you," I said, pulling the envelope out halfway. "It is a gift, a wedding gift." Hunter saw the plain white envelope and laughed. He actually laughed. "What is that, Ted?" "A gift card to Home Depot, a $50 savings bond. Keep it. We don't need your pocket change. We spent more on the flowers for the lobby than you made in your entire life." He reached out and slapped the envelope. He didn't take it. He slapped it. The envelope fell from my hand and landed on the polished marble floor. It slid a few feet away, coming to rest near a potted fern. Jasmine didn't move to pick it up. She just looked at me with cold, hard eyes. "Go away, Dad," she said. "Please just go away before security has to drag you out. You were not invited. You are not wanted. This is my life now, and there is no room in it for you." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I searched for the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I drove the excavator. I searched for the teenager who cried on my shoulder when she didn't get into her first choice college. She was gone. In her place was a stranger in a white dress, a woman who valued the appearance of wealth over the reality of love. "I understand," I said. My voice was quiet. It was the calm before the storm. "You have made your choice, Jasmine. But remember this. Once I walk out those doors, I am not coming back." "Good," Hunter said, smirking. "That is the best wedding present you could give us." I nodded slowly. I did not look at the envelope on the floor. I did not look at Hunter. I looked at my daughter one last time, burning the image into my mind because I knew the next time I saw her she would not be looking at me with arrogance. She would be looking at me with regret. I turned around. My boots clicked rhythmically on the marble as I walked away. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. The valet watched me walk to my truck. I climbed into the cab, the familiar smell of old leather and sawdust welcoming me like an old friend. I sat there for a moment watching the lights of the hotel. I could hear the muffled sound of the string quartet starting to play. The ceremony was about to begin. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken out the trash. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not call a taxi. I did not call a friend to cry. I dialed a number I had saved in my contacts months ago when Jasmine first asked me to handle the deposits. "Mr. Coleman," a voice answered on the second ring. It was Mr. Henderson, the event manager. "We are just about to start the procession. Is everything all right?" "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice as hard as cured concrete, "I am calling to inform you of a change in plans. I am the account holder for the credit line guaranteeing this event, correct?" "Yes, sir, you are the primary financier," Mr. Henderson replied, sounding confused. "Good," I said. "Cancel it. Cancel everything. The catering, the open bar, the venue rental, the flowers. Revoke the authorization on the card ending in 4599 immediately." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Sir Mr. Henderson stammered, "If I do that, the system will automatically flag the event as unpaid. We will have to stop service. The kitchen will not serve the dinner." "I know," I said, leaning back in my seat. "That is the point. But sir, the wedding is starting." "Not anymore," I said. "If I am not a guest, then I am certainly not the bank." "Shut it down, Mr. Henderson. Shut it all down." I hung up the phone. Then I dialed the bank, then the travel agency. I sat in the dark watching the hotel entrance. I waited. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, the music inside stopped abruptly. The lights in the lobby flickered, and then the screaming started. The real show was just beginning. I sat there in the cab of my 20-year-old Ford F-150, the engine block still ticking as it cooled down in the humid Atlanta night. Through the windshield, I could see the valet parking a white Bentley right where they had refused to let me park. It was almost funny. The leather of my seat was cracked, and the air inside smelled of old coffee and sawdust, but it felt more like home than that Crystal Palace ever could. I pulled my phone from my breast pocket. My hand was steady. A lifetime of laying bricks means your hands do not shake when the work gets heavy, and this was the heaviest work I had ever done. I dialed Mr. Henderson back. The poor man answered on the first ring, his voice trembling with the kind of professional panic that comes when a six-figure commission is on the line. "Mr. Coleman, please tell me this is a negotiation tactic," he pleaded. "The appetizers are already being circulated. The lobster bisque is plated." I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 7:15. I imagined the servers moving through the crowd carrying trays of food I had paid for serving guests who thought I was not good enough to breathe the same air. "Mr. Henderson, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice low and flat like a trowel smoothing wet cement. "This is not a negotiation. I am invoking Clause 14, Section B of our contract, the clause regarding immediate cancellation by the primary financier." "But, sir, the food cost alone is $40,000, Henderson stammered. "I do not care," I replied. "I want you to cease all operations immediately. Stop the kitchen, close the bar, turn off the lights. The check for $150,000 that I signed yesterday morning is officially void. If you serve one more shrimp cocktail, you are doing it at your own expense." There was a long silence on the line, followed by the sound of a man realizing his worst nightmare was happening in real time. "Do it now, Mr. Henderson, or I will sue you for unauthorized use of funds." I hung up before he could beg again. I did not feel triumph. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, but I pushed it down. The wallet in my pocket felt lighter already, but I was not done. I scrolled down my contact list to the private wealth management line at my bank. I had been a client there for 30 years, since before they had a fancy skyscraper downtown. I knew the night shift supervisor personally. His name was David. When he answered, I skipped the pleasantries. "David, I need to report a lost card," I said. "It is the Platinum Supplementary card ending in 8842, the one issued to Jasmine Coleman." David paused. "Mr. Coleman, that is your daughter's card, the one with the unlimited line. Is everything all right?" "No, David. Everything is not all right," I said, staring at the glowing entrance of the hotel. "I want you to look at the transaction history for the last month. Tell me what you see." I heard the clicking of a keyboard. "Well, sir, I see a charge for $12,000 at the Hermes Boutique in Buckhead, another for $4,000 at Christian Louboutin, a deposit for a private yacht rental in the Maldives." The list went on. Each item was a dagger. I remembered when Jasmine bought that bag. She told me it was an investment. She told me she needed it to fit in with Hunter's world. I had nodded and paid the bill like a fool, thinking I was buying my daughter's happiness. I was not buying happiness. I was funding her arrogance. I was paying for the very tools she used to look down on me. "Freeze it," I commanded. "Not just a temporary hold, David. I want you to mark it as compromised and close the account permanently. If she tries to swipe that card for a pack of gum, I want it to decline." "But, sir, she is likely at her wedding right now," David said, his voice full of hesitation. "If I kill the card, it might cause a scene." "That is exactly what I am counting on," I replied. "Kill it, David. Kill it all." I placed the phone on the passenger seat and reached for the paper bag I had tossed there earlier. Inside was a ham sandwich from the gas station down the road wrapped in wax paper. It cost $4.50. I unwrapped it slowly. The bread was a little stale and the cheese was sweating, but I took a bite anyway. I chewed slowly, staring out the window at the Grand Millennium Hotel. From my vantage point in the shadows, I had a clear view through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the ballroom. It was like watching a silent movie. I could see the chandeliers sparkling like diamonds. I could see the waiters moving in a synchronized dance, pouring vintage champagne that cost $300 a bottle. And there, in the center of the room, was Hunter. He was standing on a raised platform, holding a microphone. He looked like a golden god. He was laughing, raising his glass in a toast. I could imagine what he was saying. He was probably bragging about the merger he was about to close or the new penthouse he had just bought. He was toasting to a life he had not earned, financed by a man he had just kicked out onto the street. Jasmine was standing next to him, looking at him with adoration. She was clapping her hands, her face glowing with the pride of being Mrs. Hunter Vance. They looked perfect. They looked untouchable. They looked like they had gotten away with it. I swallowed the dry bread and took a sip of lukewarm water from a plastic bottle. "Enjoy it," I whispered to the glass. "Enjoy the champagne. It is the last thing you will ever taste on my dime." And then it happened. It was subtle at first. The waiter pouring wine at the head table stopped mid-pour. He tapped his earpiece, listening to a voice command. Then he pulled the bottle back and walked away briskly. Then the lights on the stage flickered. Hunter tapped the microphone, but the sound was dead. He looked confused, tapping it again harder this time. The band behind him stopped playing, their instruments lowering their bows and trumpets. A ripple of confusion spread through the room, and then with a finality that felt like a judge's gavel slamming down the massive crystal chandeliers overhead went dark. The room plunged into shadows. The only light came from the emergency exit signs casting a ghostly green glow over the confused faces of the elite. I took another bite of my sandwich. The show had begun. The emergency lights bathed the ballroom in an eerie green glow that made everyone look like ghosts. The silence that followed the blackout was heavy and suffocating. It was not the comfortable silence of anticipation, but the awkward, terrifying silence of a disaster unfolding in real time. Mr. Henderson walked onto the stage with the grim determination of an executioner. He did not need a microphone anymore. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the unfinished drinks. He stood center stage and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "We are experiencing a significant technical difficulty regarding the financial administration of this event. Please remain where you are while we resolve this matter with the hosts." It was a polite way of saying the check bounced, but in a room full of sharks and investors, everyone knew exactly what that code meant. The air went out of the room. 300 heads turned in unison toward the head table. Hunter stood there frozen. His glass was still raised in the air, a monument to his own stupidity. His smile, which had been plastered on his face all night, twitched and died. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a curb and realized a bus was inches from his face. He tried to laugh it off. He actually tried to chuckle. "Folks, just a little mix-up with the bank," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You know how these high-security accounts are. Too much protection, right?" Nobody laughed. The investors he was trying to impress exchanged glances. I saw one of them, a man Hunter had been bragging about landing all week, slowly place his champagne flute on a passing tray and turn his back. It was a small gesture, but it was fatal. The humiliation radiating off Hunter was palpable even from my truck. He looked small, he looked cheap, he looked exactly like what he was, a fraud in a rented tuxedo. Mr. Henderson did not wait for Hunter to finish his excuses. He walked off the stage and gestured sharply for Hunter and Jasmine to follow him. It was not a request. It was a summons. They walked out of the ballroom like two children being called to the principal's office, leaving 300 guests whispering in the dark. Inside the manager's office, the air conditioning was humming, but Hunter was sweating as if he were in a sauna. Mr. Henderson sat behind his desk and did not offer them a seat. The door clicked shut, locking out the noise of the confused guests. "Let us not waste time," Mr. Henderson said. His voice was cold, devoid of the customer service warmth he had shown earlier. "The primary funding source has been revoked. The credit card on file has been reported lost, and the contract holder has exercised his right to cancel. I have a kitchen full of staff, a bar tab running into the thousands, and vendors waiting to be paid." Hunter puffed out his chest, trying to summon the arrogance that had carried him through life so far. "Do not speak to me like that," he snapped. "Do you know who I am? I run a fintech empire. This is a minor oversight. I will have it sorted in 5 minutes. Just turn the lights back on and serve the dinner." Mr. Henderson crossed his arms. "No pay, no play. I need $150,000 right now. Or the only thing being served tonight is disappointment." Hunter scoffed and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a wallet made of ostrich leather and extracted a heavy black metal card. It was the kind of card meant to impress people at dinners, the kind that makes a heavy thud when you drop it on a table. "Put it on this," he said, tossing it onto the desk with a sneer. "And add a $5,000 tip for your trouble." Henderson picked up the card without blinking. He inserted it into the terminal on his desk. The machine whirred for a second. Then it let out a long, sharp beep. Declined. Hunter's face went pale. "Try it again," he demanded. "The chip is faulty." Henderson tried it again. Beep. Declined. "That is impossible," Hunter shouted. He was starting to panic now. He fumbled in his wallet, his hands shaking. "Here, try the Visa Infinite." Henderson took the second card. He swiped it. Beep. Declined. Sweat was now running down Hunter's forehead, dripping onto his silk collar. He pulled out a third card, a platinum business card. "This one has a $500,000 limit," he hissed. "Run it." Henderson ran it. Beep. declined. The silence in the office was absolute. The little machine sat on the desk like a judge delivering a verdict. Hunter stared at it as if it had personally betrayed him. He had no money. It was all smoke and mirrors. He had been living on credit, and the credit had just run dry. He looked at Jasmine, his eyes wide with fear. He was not the powerful CEO anymore. He was just a broke con artist who had been caught. Jasmine stood in the corner of the office, her hands clutching her designer wedding dress. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She watched her husband fail over and over again. She watched the illusion of their wealthy life disintegrate with every beep of that machine. She realized in that moment that Hunter could not save her. He could not even save himself. She needed a lifeline. She needed the one person who had never let her down, the person she had just kicked out of her life. She grabbed her phone from her clutch. Her long, manicured nails tapped frantically on the screen. I watched from my truck as my phone lit up on the passenger seat. The screen glowed bright in the darkness of the cab. The name Princess appeared along with a picture of her from her high school graduation. She was smiling in that picture, innocent and kind. It felt like looking at a ghost. I picked up the phone. I did not slide the bar to answer. I just looked at it. It vibrated in my hand, a desperate electronic heartbeat pleading for help. I could imagine her on the other end. She was probably crying. She was probably ready to say sorry. She was probably ready to promise me anything if I would just turn the money back on. But an apology born from desperation is not an apology. It is a transaction. And I was done with transactions. I looked at the hotel entrance. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. It tasted bitter, but it helped wash down the lump in my throat. The phone kept buzzing. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Each vibration was a reminder of a time I would have dropped everything to save her. When she scraped her knee, when she failed a test, when she crashed her first car. I was always there with my checkbook and my unconditional love. Not tonight. I pressed the button on the side of the phone. The screen went black. The buzzing stopped. The silence in the truck was heavy but necessary. Inside the office, Jasmine stared at her phone in disbelief. The call had gone to voicemail. Her father never sent her to voicemail. He always answered, even when he was on a job site, even when it was late. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He was serious. He was not playing a game. He was not trying to teach her a small lesson. He was gone. She lowered the phone slowly, her hand trembling. She looked at Hunter, who was still arguing with the manager, and then she looked at her reflection in the dark office window. She was a bride with no wedding, a daughter with no father, and for the first time in her life she was completely and utterly alone. The darkness of the room seemed to swallow her whole as the reality of her choices finally settled in. "Dad is not coming," she whispered to the empty air. "Dad is not coming back." The door to the manager's office flew open, and the Hunter who walked out was not the man my daughter married. The polished CEO mask had melted away completely, leaving behind a frightened, vicious boy. He was not whispering anymore. He was screaming. I could see the veins bulging in his neck from 50 yards away in the parking lot. He cornered Jasmine against a marble pillar in the lobby. His finger was in her face, poking the air violently. I could not hear every word through the glass, but I can read body language better than I can read a blueprint. He was blaming her. He was telling her that she was useless. I saw her recoil, her lip trembling as she tried to shrink away from him. He grabbed her arm, not with love, but with a grip that was meant to hurt. "You had one job," he seemed to be screaming. "Just keep the old man happy until the check clears. You could not even do that." She tried to touch his chest to calm him down, to remind him that they were in public, but he swatted her hand away like it was a fly. This was the real Hunter, the man who valued people only for what they could provide. Now that the ATM was broken, he was kicking the machine. It was painful to watch, but I did not look away. Jasmine needed to see this. She needed to see the monster she had chosen over her own flesh and blood. She needed to see that his love was just as fake as the credit limit on his black card. The rot spread through the ballroom faster than black mold in a damp basement. The guests were not stupid. They saw the lights go out. They saw the manager escort the bride and groom away like criminals. And now they saw the violent argument in the lobby. The exodus began. It started with the older folks, the ones who had seen enough pretenders in their lives to know when the show was over. They collected their coats and signaled for their cars. Then the whispers started. a toxic hum of gossip that filled the silence left by the band. I saw women leaning in close to each other, covering their mouths with manicured hands, their eyes darting toward my daughter. They were not sympathetic. They were entertained. This was the best drama they had seen all year. But the killing blow came from the man Hunter had been chasing all night, the investor. He was a silver-haired man in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. Hunter saw him heading for the door and broke away from Jasmine. He ran to him, practically tripping over his own feet. I saw Hunter pleading, his hands clasped together. He was probably trying to explain it away as a banking error, a simple misunderstanding. The investor did not stop walking. He looked at Hunter with a cold, flat stare that said everything. He knew. He knew there was no capital. He knew the fintech empire was built on credit and lies. He shook his head once, a small, dismissive movement, and walked out the door past the valet and into the night. Hunter stood there alone in the middle of the lobby, watching his $2 million deal drive away in a town car. That was the moment the dam finally broke. Hunter turned around. His face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He needed to hit something. He needed to destroy something to make himself feel powerful again. His eyes landed on a massive Ming-style vase standing on a pedestal near the entrance. It was a beautiful piece, blue and white, and probably worth more than $5,000. He roared a sound of pure frustration and shoved the pedestal over. The crash was deafening. Porcelain shattered across the marble floor, sending sharp shards skittering like ice in every direction. The sound echoed through the lobby, stopping everyone in their tracks. Mr. Henderson did not hesitate this time. He was on his radio in a second. I saw the flashing blue lights of a squad car pull up 2 minutes later. They were already nearby, probably responding to a noise complaint. 2 officers walked in, stone-faced and serious. Hunter was breathing hard, standing over the wreckage of the vase like a petulant child. Mr. Henderson pointed at him. The officers approached. Jasmine tried to intervene. She was crying hysterically now, desperate to fix the unfixable. She reached up and unclasped her diamond earrings, the massive studs Hunter had given her as a wedding gift just that morning. She thrust them at Mr. Henderson, begging him to take them as collateral for the damage. Henderson took one, looked at it under the bright lobby light, and handed it back with a look of absolute pity. "These are cubic zirconia, ma'am," he said, his voice flat. "They are glass. They are worth maybe $20. Jasmine froze. She looked at the earrings in her palm, then at Hunter. The realization washed over her face. Even the diamonds were a lie. The police grabbed Hunter's arms, pulling them behind his back. He did not fight them. He looked defeated. He looked small. And as they led him out past his weeping wife holding her fake diamonds, I started the engine of my truck. The lesson was just beginning. It was 2 in the morning when the war came to my doorstep. I was sleeping the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that only comes when your conscience is clean and your debts are paid. My house is small, a 3-bedroom ranch on the outskirts of Atlanta, built with my own hands 40 years ago. It does not have marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but the roof does not leak and the walls are solid brick, much like the man who lives inside them. The silence was broken not by a knock, but by a pounding that shook the window frames. It sounded like someone was trying to kick the door off its hinges. I did not panic. Panic is for people who do not know how to handle a crisis. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed, my joints popping in the cool night air. I reached into the nightstand drawer, but I did not grab a gun. I grabbed my glasses. I knew who it was. I walked down the hallway, pulling my robe tight around me. The pounding did not stop. "Open up!" Old Man Hunter's voice screamed from the other side, muffled by the heavy oak door. "Open this door right now or I will break it down!" I unlocked the deadbolt and turned the knob. The door flew open, violently slamming against the wall and knocking a picture frame to the floor. They stood there, framed by the porch light, looking like a tragedy in high definition. Jasmine was still in her wedding dress, but the hem was black with street dirt and wine stains bloomed across the bodice like fresh bruises. Her makeup was smeared, her hair a tangled mess of hairspray and sweat. Hunter looked worse. His tuxedo shirt was torn at the collar and his face was flushed a deep, angry red. He smelled of stale sweat and cheap whiskey. They did not look like newlyweds coming home from a party. They looked like fugitives running from a crime scene. Hunter did not wait for an invitation. He stormed into my living room, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "You ruined everything," he shouted, spinning around to face me. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and wide with adrenaline. "Do you have any idea what you did tonight? You humiliated me. You destroyed my reputation in front of the most important people in this city. You owe me millions, old man. Millions." I stood my ground by the fireplace, my arms crossed over my chest. I did not move. I did not flinch. I looked him up and down with the same cold appraisal I would give a cracked foundation. "I do not owe you a dime, Hunter," I said calmly, my voice steady. "Get out of my house." That broke him. The calm, the authority. He let out a roar of frustration and lunged at me. He raised his fist, aiming for my face. He saw an old man. He saw gray hair and a bathrobe. He saw a victim. He forgot what I did for a living. He forgot that while he was pushing papers and clicking buttons, I was lifting cinder blocks and bending rebar for 12 hours a day. I did not step back. I stepped forward. As his fist came down, I caught his wrist in my left hand. My grip was like a vice hardened by 50 years of labor. I twisted his arm behind his back in one fluid motion, using his own momentum against him. He yelped in pain and surprise, stumbling forward. I kicked the back of his knee and he crumpled to the floor face first onto the rug Lucille had crocheted. I pressed my knee into his back, pinning him down with effortless weight. He thrashed and cursed, but he was helpless against the strength of a man who built skyscrapers. "Stay down, boy," I growled into his ear. "You might wear Italian suits, but you are soft. You have never worked a day in your life. I could snap you like a dry twig." I led him up slowly, shoving him toward the sofa. He scrambled back, rubbing his shoulder, looking at me with a mixture of shock and pure hatred. The humiliation burned brighter on his face than the anger. He had just been physically dominated by a 71-year-old bricklayer in front of his wife. It was the ultimate emasculation. Jasmine screamed when he hit the floor, but she did not move to help him. She just stared at me as if I had turned into a monster. "You assaulted him," she cried, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You assaulted my husband. I am calling the police." "Go ahead," I said, walking over to the side table. "Call them. I am sure they would love to know where he is." I picked up a thick manila folder I had left there earlier that evening. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the wood until it hit Hunter's leg. "What is this?" he sneered, picking it up with trembling hands. "Open it," I said. "It is your resume, not the one you show investors, the real one." He opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page and the color drained from his face faster than water from a broken pipe. It was a report from the SEC. It detailed an ongoing investigation into his fintech company. It outlined a classic Ponzi scheme structure. It listed gambling debts in Vegas and Atlantic City totaling over $500,000. It showed that the penthouse was leased under a shell company that was 3 months behind on rent. Jasmine snatched the papers from his hands. She read them, her eyes darting back and forth. "Dad, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This says he is under investigation. This says he is broke. It says he is a fraud, Jasmine," I replied, my voice softening just a fraction. He needed this wedding to sign new investors to pay off the old ones. I was not just paying for a party. I was laundering money for a criminal. Jasmine looked at Hunter. He was not denying it. He was just staring at the floor, sweating. "Tell him he is lying." "Hunter," she begged. "Tell him this is fake." Hunter looked up, his eyes cold and desperate. "It is complicated, Jasmine," he said. "Business is complicated. Your father does not understand finance. He is just a jealous old laborer trying to tear us apart." He reached for her hand. "Baby, you know me. We are a team. Do not let him win." Jasmine looked at the papers, then at me, then at Hunter. She was standing at a crossroads. One path led to the truth, but it meant admitting she had married a failure and that her father was right. The other path was a lie, but it let her keep her pride. She dropped the papers on the table. "You are lying," she spat at me, stepping closer to Hunter. "You forged these. You just hate that I married a white man who is successful. You want me to be miserable like you." I looked at her, and I saw my little girl die right there in my living room. I did not argue. I did not fight. I just pointed to the door. "Get out," I said. "Take your husband and get out." Jasmine stood there in my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her wedding night and the evidence of her husband's crimes, and she made a choice. She chose to hurt me. She knew she could not win with logic. She knew the papers on the table were real. So she reached into the darkest part of our history and pulled out a weapon she knew would cripple me. Her face twisted into a sneer that looked disturbingly like Hunter's. "You are pathetic," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. You are just a jealous, bitter old man who hates that I found someone better than you. You hate that Hunter has class. You hate that he dreams big. You spent your whole life playing in the dirt, Dad, and you want me to do the same. You want me to be small." I did not speak. I just watched her. She stepped closer, her eyes burning with a hatred I had never seen before. "It is just like with Mom," she said, and the air left the room. "You let her die, Dad. You killed her with your cheapness. I remember hearing you argue with the doctors about the bills. I remember you saying we could not afford the experimental treatment. You sat on your pile of money like a miser while she wasted away in that hospice bed. You could have saved her. You could have spent every dime you had, but you were too scared of being poor. You loved your bank account more than you loved your wife, and now you are trying to do the same thing to me. You want to destroy my happiness because you are too cheap to pay for it." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My breath caught in my throat. She was rewriting history. She was taking the most painful, tragic moment of my life and twisting it into a weapon. She did not know. She did not know that I had sold my construction company for pennies on the dollar to pay for Lucille's chemotherapy. She did not know I had mortgaged this very house 3 times. She did not know that the arguments with the doctors were not about money, but about them telling me there was nothing left to do while I begged them to try one more thing. She did not know because I protected her from it. I sent her away to boarding school so she would not have to hear her mother screaming in pain. I shielded her from the poverty that followed so she could finish her degree without worrying about student loans. And this was my reward. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear but from the sheer agony of holding back the truth. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to show her the receipts from the hospital that I finally paid off 5 years ago. I wanted to tell her that I ate oatmeal for dinner for 2 years so she could have a new car for college. But I looked at her face and I stopped. I saw the way she was looking at me. There was no curiosity in her eyes. There was no desire for truth. She had created a narrative that justified her selfishness. In her mind, I was the villain and she was the victim. If she believed I was a monster, then she did not have to feel guilty about treating me like garbage. She had been brainwashed not just by Hunter, but by her own vanity. She had fallen in love with the idea of wealth so deeply that she was willing to desecrate her mother's memory just to defend a fraud. The silence stretched out between us heavy and suffocating. I felt a part of my soul wither and die. The father in me, the one who would catch a grenade for her, wanted to explain. But the man in me, the exhausted laborer who had given everything and received nothing, knew it was pointless. You cannot explain color to a blind man, and you cannot explain sacrifice to a narcissist. She did not want a father. She wanted a financier, and since the bank was closed, she had no use for me. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of my old house, the house she despised. I straightened my back. The pain was still there, sharp and bleeding, but I pushed it down into the steel box, where I kept my grief. I looked at Hunter, who was still rubbing his shoulder on the sofa, watching us with a smirk. He thought he had won. He thought Jasmine's cruelty had broken me. He was wrong. It had not broken me. It had liberated me. I walked over to the front door and opened it wide. The night air rushed in, cooling the heated atmosphere of the room. "Get out," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. Jasmine laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "We are leaving," she said, linking her arm through Hunter's. "Do not worry. We are going back to the penthouse. Back to our life. A life you will never be a part of again. I hope you enjoy dying alone in this dump old man." I looked at them standing there in their ruined wedding clothes, clutching their arrogance like a shield. "You are not going back to the penthouse," I said simply. Jasmine stopped. "What are you talking about? Of course we are. It is my home." "No, it is not," I replied. I walked back to the coffee table and picked up the folder again. I pulled out a document from the back. It was a deed held by a holding company called Coleman Properties, LLC. "You really never paid attention to the details, did you, Jasmine?" I said, tapping the paper. "Hunter told you he was leasing the penthouse. He told you his company paid for it. That was a lie. Hunter has bad credit. He could not lease a bicycle, let alone a luxury apartment in Buckhead. He needed a guarantor. He needed someone with a perfect credit score and substantial assets." Hunter's face went gray. He knew. He had known all along. "I bought the building, Jasmine," I said. "I bought the whole complex 3 years ago as an investment. When Hunter needed a place to impress you, I let him move in. I set up a lease agreement under his company name, but I am the landlord. And guess what? You are 3 months behind on rent." Jasmine stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. "You own the building," she whispered. "I do," I said. "And as the landlord, I am evicting you. Tonight. You have violated the terms of the lease by conducting illegal business activities on the premises. I have already notified building security. They are changing the locks as we speak. Your key cards will not work." "You cannot do that," she shrieked. "That is illegal. You have to give us 30 days' notice." "Read the lease, Jasmine," I said coldly. Clause 19. Immediate termination for criminal activity. The SEC investigation is public record now. You are out. She looked at Hunter for help, but he was staring at the floor defeated. He knew the game was up. Jasmine's eyes darted around the room looking for a lifeline. Then she sneered. "Fine," she spat. "Keep your stupid apartment. We will go to a hotel. We will drive there in my Mercedes. At least I have my car. You cannot take that." I almost laughed. It was a sad, tired laugh. "Your Mercedes?" I asked. "The white G-Wagon with the custom interior. The one Hunter bought you for your birthday last year." "Yes," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "It is in my name." "Is it?" I asked. I walked over to the desk in the corner and pulled out a spare set of keys. I held them up. The Mercedes logo glinted in the lamplight. "Hunter did not buy that car, Jasmine. He put down a deposit using a check that bounced a week later. The dealership called me because I had co-signed for your first Honda Civic 10 years ago, and I was still on your file. To keep you from being arrested for grand theft auto, I paid off the car. I put it under the company fleet insurance to save money." I took a step closer to her. "Look at the registration in the glove box, Jasmine. Look at the title. It does not say Jasmine Coleman. It says Coleman Construction. You are listed as an authorized driver. Just an authorized driver." I dangled the keys in front of her face. "And as the owner of the vehicle, I am revoking your authorization, effective immediately." Jasmine reached for the keys, but I pulled them back. "No," I said. "You are walking." She looked at me with pure horror. She was stripped bare. No home, no car, no money, no husband worth a damn. She had nothing. "You are a monster," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "You are ruining my life." "I did not ruin your life, Jasmine," I said, my voice hard as granite. "I just stopped paying for the fantasy. Now get out of my house, get off my property, and do not come back until you learn how to be a human being." Hunter scrambled up from the sofa and grabbed Jasmine's arm, dragging her toward the door. He wanted to get away from me, away from the truth. They stumbled out onto the porch into the darkness of the early morning. I watched them walk down the driveway, their expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. They looked like ghosts fading into the mist. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. The sound was final. I was alone in the house my wife and I had built. It was quiet. It was empty. But for the first time in a long time, it felt clean. I woke up the next morning to find out I was the most hated man in Atlanta without even leaving my front porch. My phone was buzzing so hard against the nightstand I thought it might shatter the wood. It was not calls this time, it was notifications. Thousands of them. I opened social media and there they were. Jasmine and Hunter were live streaming. They were sitting on the edge of a bed in a motel room that looked clean enough, but clearly was not the Ritz. The lighting was carefully arranged to make them look pale and exhausted. Jasmine was weeping softly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while Hunter had his arm around her, looking into the camera with the somber expression of a man who had survived a war. They were telling a story, but it was not the story of what happened. It was a fairy tale of victimhood. Hunter spoke first, his voice low and grave. He told the world that I was a toxic narcissist. He said I had financial control issues. He said I had promised them a wedding and a home only to pull the rug out from under them because I was jealous of his success. Then he played the card I knew was coming. He looked straight into the lens and said that I hated him because he was white. He said I could not stand seeing my black daughter with a successful white man, so I tried to destroy them financially to teach them a lesson in racial loyalty. It was a lie so bold and disgusting it almost made me laugh. Jasmine nodded along, confirming every word. She told the camera that I had abused her emotionally her whole life, holding money over her head like a weapon. She did not mention the Ponzi scheme. She did not mention the insults about her mother. The comments section was rolling by so fast it was a blur. People who did not know me were calling for my head. They called me a monster. They called me a racist. They said they would boycott my construction business, which was funny since I had been retired for 5 years. The internet mob had lit their torches and my daughter had handed them the matches. I drove into the city an hour later to meet Sarah. Sarah has been my lawyer for 20 years. She is a shark in a skirt, a woman who can smell blood in the water from 3 miles away. When I walked into her office, she was already pacing. Her face was red. She had the live stream playing on a tablet on her desk. "Thaddeus, this is defamation per se," she said, without even saying hello. She pointed a manicured finger at the screen. "They are lying about your business practices. They are accusing you of hate crimes, essentially. We can sue them for libel. We can get an injunction to shut this down within the hour. Let me draft the cease and desist. I want to bury them." I sat down in the leather chair opposite her and placed my hat on my knee. I watched Hunter on the screen. He was asking for donations now. He had set up a crowdfunding page to help them recover from the trauma of being homeless on their wedding night. The donations were trickling in $5 here, $10 there. "No, Sarah," I said calmly. "Do not send a letter. Do not file an injunction." Sarah stopped pacing. She looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Thaddeus, they are destroying your reputation. They are painting you as a villain. If we do not respond, it looks like an admission of guilt." "Let them talk," I replied, leaning back. "Let them tell their story. Let them get comfortable in the spotlight. Right now, they are just two kids crying on the internet. If I sue them now, I look like the bully they say I am. I want them to feel safe. I want them to think they are winning. When you climb a ladder, Sarah, you have to go high enough that the fall breaks your neck. They are only on the second rung. Let them climb." Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then she slowly sat down. A small smile played on her lips. "You are a scary man, Thaddeus Coleman," she said. I shrugged. "I am just a bricklayer, Sarah. I know that you cannot knock down a wall until it is fully built." The knock on my door came 2 days later. It was not the police this time. It was a process server. He was a sweaty man in a short-sleeved shirt who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He mumbled my name, thrust a thick packet of papers into my hand, and practically ran back to his car. I stood on the porch and opened the envelope. It was a lawsuit. Hunter and Jasmine were suing me. I flipped through the pages reading the legal jargon. They were suing for breach of oral contract regarding the wedding funding. They were suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were suing for unlawful eviction from the penthouse. And then I saw the number, $5 million. They were demanding $5 million in damages. Hunter had signed the complaint himself. He probably thought this was his masterstroke. He thought I was just an uneducated laborer who would see a court seal and panic. He thought I would be so terrified of a judge that I would open my checkbook and settle just to make it go away. He thought he was playing chess against a man who only knew how to play checkers. I laughed. It was a deep belly laugh that echoed off the siding of my house. Hunter did not understand the legal system. He did not understand that by filing this lawsuit, he had just given me the greatest gift possible. He had given me the right to discovery. That meant I could subpoena his financial records. I could depose his investors. I could force him to testify under oath about every single dollar he had stolen and every lie he had told. He had just opened the door to his own destruction and invited me inside. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the phone. "Sarah," I said when she answered, "get your team ready. They just sued me for $5 million. I could hear the smile in her voice. "Send me the papers, Thaddeus. It is time to go to work." I did not go to the penthouse alone. I brought the law with me in the form of Sheriff Miller. Miller and I go back 40 years. We played high school football on the same mud-soaked field, and we served on the same deacon board at church, so he knows the kind of man I am, and he knows a con artist when he sees one. The sun was just starting to burn off the morning fog when Miller's squad car pulled up to the curb of the high-rise, and I was already there leaning against the hood of my truck, watching the building like a hawk. Miller stepped out, adjusting his belt, and he did not look happy, but he looked ready. We walked into the lobby together, and the concierge tried to stop us, murmuring about privacy protocols, but Miller just held up the court order signed by a judge who was tired of Hunter's stalling tactics. We rode the elevator in silence, the numbers ticking up to the 42nd floor, and when the doors slid open, we did not knock. Miller used the master key. We walked into a scene of absolute denial where Hunter was sitting on my leather sofa in a silk robe drinking espresso like he hadn't just sued me for $5 million while Jasmine was on the balcony taking a selfie. They looked up startled and Hunter stood up spilling his coffee, demanding to know the meaning of this, trying to summon his usual arrogance. Miller didn't blink. He simply told Hunter Vance he was hereby served with an immediate order of eviction for illegal occupancy and criminal misuse of property, and that he had 10 minutes to vacate the premises before anything left behind became the property of the landlord. Hunter laughed a nervous, high-pitched sound and said, "You cannot do this. My lawyer will have your badge," but Miller just smiled, a cold, hard smile, and said, "Your lawyer is the one who called me son. He dropped you this morning when your check bounced, so pack your bags." The next 10 minutes were a chaotic symphony of panic as Jasmine was screaming, running from room to room, grabbing armfuls of designer clothes and shoving them into Louis Vuitton duffel bags, not crying about losing her home, but crying about leaving behind her shoe collection. Hunter was frantic. He was not packing clothes. He was packing hard drives and shredding documents until Miller put a stop to that, immediately grabbing Hunter by the back of his silk robe and hauling him away from the shredder, growling that it was evidence and to leave it. When the 10 minutes were up, Miller's deputies escorted them into the hallway for the walk of shame to end all walks of shame, because the neighbors had come out. These were the people Hunter had been trying to impress for months, the people he had sneered at me about, and they were standing in their doorways holding their morning coffee, watching the self-proclaimed king of fintech being marched out by the police. Phones were out and videos were being recorded, and I saw Mrs. Vanderhoven, a woman Hunter claimed was his mentor, recording the whole thing with a look of pure amusement. Hunter saw her too, and broke away from the deputy for a second, desperate for a lifeline, pleading with Margaret to tell them who he was and to call the mayor, saying this was a misunderstanding. Margaret did not call the mayor. She did not even stop recording. She just looked at him and said, "Oh, I know who you are. Hunter, we all saw the news this morning. Your scheme is over, darling." Hunter pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely unlock the screen, and started dialing, muttering names of senators and bankers and hedge fund managers, people he claimed were his best friends. I watched as he made call after call, getting only voicemail and busy signals because the people who drank his champagne and laughed at his jokes were gone. They were ghosts who knew he was radioactive and they had scrubbed him from their contacts list. He was screaming into the phone now, begging anyone to answer, begging for a loan, begging for a favor. But silence was the only answer he got until the deputies finally grabbed his arms and pushed him into the elevator while Jasmine followed sobbing into her handbag, leaving me behind to change the locks. The sidewalk is a great equalizer. It does not care if your luggage costs $10,000 or $10, because if you have nowhere to go, you are just homeless. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse 40 floors up and watched them down below looking like ants, standing on the curb surrounded by a mountain of monogrammed leather bags. Jasmine was sitting on a suitcase, her head in her hands, while Hunter was pacing again, still yelling into his phone. I could see him gesturing at passing taxis until a yellow cab finally pulled over and Hunter opened the door and started loading bags. Then he stopped and patted his pockets, pulling out his wallet to say something to the driver, but the driver shook his head and laughed. Hunter tried another card, and the driver waved him off, closed the door and drove away, because I knew exactly what had happened. The credit cards were dead, and the bank accounts were frozen pending the investigation, so they did not have cash, they did not have credit, and they did not even have a bus pass. They were stranded in the middle of the city. They tried to conquer with nothing but expensive leather bags filled with clothes they had no place to wear. Jasmine stood up and kicked one of the bags, screaming at Hunter, pointing a finger in his face while he screamed back, and the perfect couple, the power team, was disintegrating right there on the concrete. It started to rain, a slow gray drizzle that soaked into their silk clothes and ruined Jasmine's hair, and when they tried to huddle under the awning of the building, the doorman, the same man Hunter had never tipped, stepped out and firmly asked them to move along because they were loitering. They grabbed their heavy bags, dragging them down the wet street, looking heavy and burdensome, looking like exactly what they were: baggage. I turned away from the balcony and walked back inside my apartment, knowing it was time to call a cleaning crew because the place smelled like cheap cologne and lies. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel buzzed with a dying electrical hum that sounded like a fly trapped in a jar. It was the kind of place that charged by the hour and did not ask for ID at the front desk. Inside room 12, the air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and mildew. Jasmine sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, surrounded by the few Louis Vuitton bags she had managed to salvage before the eviction. Hunter was passed out on the other bed, still wearing his tuxedo pants, but shirtless, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm of drunken exhaustion. He had spent the last of his cash on a bottle of vodka from the liquor store across the street. Jasmine was not sleeping. She was frantically digging through a duffel bag looking for something she could sell: a watch, a bracelet, anything to get them out of this hellhole. Her hand brushed against something stiff at the bottom of the bag. It was a crumpled white envelope. It had a footprint on it, a size 12 dress shoe print. It was the envelope I had tried to give her at the wedding. The one Hunter had slapped out of my hand. The one he had called pocket change. She had picked it up off the ballroom floor, not out of sentiment, but out of habit, because she never left anything behind. She pulled it out, smoothing the wrinkles against her knee. She stared at my handwriting on the front, simply reading, "To my little girl." Her hands were shaking. Maybe there was cash inside, maybe a few $100s, enough for a better hotel, enough for food. She slid her manicured finger under the flap and tore it open. She pulled out a single sheet of folded notebook paper and a rectangular slip of blue safety paper. She looked at the blue slip first. Her eyes widened until I thought they might pop out of her head. Her breath hitched in her throat, making a sound like a dying engine. It was a cashier's check drawn from my private savings account. The amount was written in bold black ink. $1 million. She blinked, rubbing her eyes, thinking the bad lighting was playing tricks on her. But the numbers did not change. $1 million. She dropped the check onto the bedspread as if it were on fire and picked up the letter. I had written it the night before the wedding, sitting at my kitchen table, thinking about the woman she used to be. "My dearest Jasmine," the letter read. "I know you think I do not approve of your life, but I have always believed in your talent. I remember when you were 12 and you turned our kitchen into a bakery. I remember your dream of opening your own fusion restaurant in downtown Atlanta. You told me once that you wanted to feed people, not impress them. I sold the last parcel of land I owned in Savannah to give you this. This is not for a house. This is not for Hunter. This is for you. This is seed money for your restaurant. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot cook. Do not let anyone tell you that you need a man to be successful. Build your own empire. Love, Dad." Jasmine read the letter twice, then a third time. A guttural scream tore from her throat. She looked at Hunter, snoring on the bed, a man who was broke, a fraud, and a liar. Then she looked at the check. $1 million. She had traded $1 million dream and a father who believed in her for a man who had just gotten them kicked onto the street. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had not just burned a bridge, she had blown up the bank. She did not wake Hunter. She did not leave a note. She grabbed the check, and the letter shoved her feet into her dirty heels and ran out of the room. She flagged down a confused Uber driver who had just dropped someone off at the gas station and offered him her last $20 bill to drive her to my house. It was pouring rain when she arrived. I was sitting on my porch in my rocking chair watching the storm. I knew she would come. The greed always brings them back. She ran up the driveway, her expensive dress soaked and clinging to her skin, her makeup running in black streaks down her face. She threw herself at my feet on the porch steps. "Dad," she wailed, clutching my knees. "Dad, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please forgive me. I read the letter, Dad. I want to open the restaurant. I want to be your little girl again." She held up the check with trembling hands, offering it to me as if she were returning a holy relic. "Just let me come home. Let me start over. We can do this together, just like you said." I looked down at her. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. The tears seemed real. The shaking seemed real. But I knew my daughter. I knew that she was not crying for me. She was crying for the 7 zeros on that piece of paper. She was crying because she was cold and hungry, and I was her winning lottery ticket. I reached down and took the check from her hand. She smiled through her tears, a look of relief washing over her face. She thought she had won. She thought the old bricklayer was soft. I held the check up to the porch light. "It is a lot of money, Jasmine," I said softly. "It represents 50 years of sweat, broken bones, missed holidays. It is a lifetime." "Yes, Dad." She nodded eagerly. "I know. I appreciate it so much. I will make you proud." I looked her dead in the eye. "You already had your chance to make me proud," I said. "You chose to humiliate me. You chose to stand by a thief while he mocked me." I gripped the check in both hands. The sound of the paper tearing was louder than the thunder overhead. "Rip!" Jasmine screamed. "No, no, Dad. What are you doing?" I tore it again and again, until the $1 million was nothing but blue confetti raining down onto the wet porch floor. "That money is gone, Jasmine," I said, my voice hard. "Opportunity knocks once. When you slammed the door in my face, you slammed it on this too. This money is going to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in your mother's name. At least there it will cure cancer instead of funding your vanity." Jasmine scrambled on the floor, trying to pick up the wet pieces, trying to puzzle them back together, but they were dissolving in the rain. "Get off my porch," I said, turning my back on her. "And do not come back until you have earned $1 million with your own 2 hands." Jasmine walked back into room 12 of the Starlight Motel, looking like a ghost that had been dragged through a swamp. The rain was still dripping from the hem of her ruined wedding dress, creating a puddle of dirty water on the carpet. Hunter was sitting up on the bed now, his eyes bloodshot and focusing on her empty hands. He did not ask if she was okay. He did not ask why she was crying. He looked at her hands, then at her pockets, then back at her hands. "Where is it?" He rasped, his voice thick with vodka. "Where is the check, Jasmine?" She stood there shivering, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to hold her shattered pieces together. He tore it up. She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. "He tore it up, Hunter. It is gone. He offered me the money, and then he destroyed it right in front of me. It is all gone. All." Hunter stared at her for a second, processing the information. Then the explosion came. He launched himself off the bed with a speed that defied his drunkenness. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her so hard her head snapped back. "You let him tear it up," he screamed, spit flying into her face. "You stupid, useless girl. You had one job. Go get the money. That was it. And you let a senile old man tear up our ticket out of here." Jasmine tried to pull away, sobbing, begging him to stop, but he was not listening. The rage took over. He raised his hand and struck her across the face. It was a backhanded blow that sent her sprawling onto the stained carpet. Her lips split and blood trickled down her chin, staining the white lace of her dress red. She curled into a ball, expecting more, but Hunter turned away, pacing the small room like a caged tiger, kicking the furniture and throwing the lamp against the wall. He stopped pacing abruptly, his eyes fixing on the cracked mirror above the dresser. A dark realization seemed to settle over him, calming his physical rage but igniting something much colder in his mind. He turned back to Jasmine, who was still on the floor, holding her bleeding lip. "Get up," he commanded. "We are not done. There is another way." Jasmine looked up at him through her swollen eye, terrified. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Your father is old school," Hunter said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He does not trust banks. He never did. I remember you telling me stories about how he used to pay his day laborers in cash every Friday. He keeps a safe in the house, doesn't he? A floor safe in the study under the rug." Jasmine froze. She remembered the safe. She knew exactly where it was. She knew that I kept emergency funds there for payroll and supplies, a habit from 40 years in construction that I never broke. But the thought of stealing from me directly, of breaking into my home after everything that had happened, made her stomach turn. "I cannot do that, Hunter," she said, shaking her head. "He has cameras. He has an alarm. I cannot steal from him." Hunter knelt down in front of her. He was not hitting her now. He was smiling, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "You can do it, and you will do it," he said, "because you know the code. You told me once it is your mother's birthday." Jasmine shook her head again, backing away until she hit the wall. "No, Hunter. I will go to jail. I will lose him forever." Hunter reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times and then turned it around to face her. On the screen was a video. It was intimate. It was private. It was something Jasmine had sent him 6 months ago when he was away on a business trip that never existed. It was meant for his eyes, only a moment of vulnerability and trust between a wife and her husband. "Look at this," Jasmine, Hunter said, his voice silky and cruel. "You look so pretty here, so eager to please. It would be a shame if this ended up on the internet. It would be a shame if your old church friends saw this, or your former boss, or your father." Jasmine gasped, reaching for the phone, but he pulled it back. "Do not touch it," he warned. "It is backed up on the cloud." "One click, Jasmine. One click and everyone sees everything. Think about your reputation. Think about the shame. You think losing a wedding is bad? Wait until you lose your dignity." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of rot and alcohol. "You are going to go to that house. You are going to open that safe. And you are going to bring me every single dollar inside. Or I promise you, by tomorrow morning, you will be the star of every adult website in America." Jasmine looked at the phone, then at Hunter. She saw the monster clearly now. There was no love left. There was no partnership. There was only leverage. She felt the trap closing around her neck, tight and suffocating. She thought about the video spreading through her community. She thought about me seeing it. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She was cornered. She was a rat in a maze with no exit. "Okay," she whispered, her spirit finally breaking completely. "Okay, I will do it. Just please do not post it." Hunter smiled and patted her cheek, the same cheek he had slapped moments ago. "Good girl," he said. "Now clean yourself up. We have a robbery to commit." Jasmine stood up on shaky legs and went into the bathroom. She looked at her reflection in the dirty mirror. Her lip was swollen. Her dress was ruined. Her eyes were dead. She washed the blood off her face, but she knew she could never wash away the stain of what she was about to do. She walked out of the bathroom, leaving her conscience behind in the sink. She was no longer Jasmine Coleman. She was just a pawn in a game she had already lost. The house was silent as a tomb when she entered through the back kitchen door. I had left it unlocked. It was not carelessness. It was a test, a final heartbreaking test that I prayed she would fail to take. Jasmine crept through the hallway of her childhood home, her footsteps muffled by the carpet I had installed 20 years ago to cushion her toddler falls. She was shaking so badly I could hear her breath hitching in the darkness. She moved like a stranger in a place that used to be her sanctuary. She knew exactly where to go. She bypassed the living room and went straight to my study, the small room with the oak desk where I used to pay bills and count the weekly payroll cash for my crew. She knelt on the floor, her expensive ruined dress pooling around her knees. Her hands fumbled with the corner of the Persian rug, pulling it back to reveal the steel face of the floor safe. It was an old safe, heavy and stubborn, just like me. She reached for the dial. Her fingers trembled as she spun the numbers. She did not need to write them down. She knew them by heart. 04 1265. April 12, 1965. Her mother's birthday. The date of the woman who had loved her more than life itself. The fact that she was using Lucille's birthday to rob me was a knife twisting in my gut. I heard the tumblers click into place. It was a mechanical sound that echoed in the silence. The handle turned. The heavy steel door creaked open. Jasmine let out a sob of relief, reaching into the dark hollow of the safe, expecting to find stacks of cash. Her hand brushed against the cold metal bottom. It was empty. There was no money. There was only a single sheet of paper lying in the center. She pulled it out, squinting in the dark to read it. It was a note in my handwriting. It said simply, "I am disappointed." The moment she read those words, the world exploded around her. I pressed the button on the remote I was holding. A deafening siren ripped through the air, wailing like a banshee. It was a new system, industrial grade, loud enough to wake the dead in the cemetery 3 miles away. Simultaneously, the floodlights I had installed in the corners of the study ceiling blazed to life. They were blinding white LEDs that washed out every shadow, exposing her completely. Jasmine screamed, dropping the note and curling into a ball on the floor, covering her ears against the noise. She looked small and pathetic, a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. I walked out from the shadows of the hallway and stood at the top of the staircase, looking down into the open study door. I did not look angry. I did not look scary. I just looked tired. I looked at the daughter I had raised stealing from me in the middle of the night, and I felt the final tether between us snap. She looked up, her eyes squinting against the glare, and saw me. "Dad," she mouthed the word lost in the screaming of the siren. "Dad, please help me." I did not move. I did not turn off the alarm. I let it ring. I let it announce her crime to the world. I watched her scramble backward, away from the empty safe, away from the evidence of her betrayal, but there was nowhere to go. The trap had snapped shut, and she was the one who had walked into it. Blue and red lights flashed through the front windows, joining the chaos of the strobe lights inside. I had called them 5 minutes ago when the motion sensors in the kitchen first alerted me to an intruder. The front door burst open. 3 officers stormed in, their weapons drawn, shouting commands that were barely audible over the alarm. I finally pressed the button to cut the siren. The sudden silence was heavier than the noise. "Get on the ground," an officer shouted at Jasmine. She froze, paralyzed by fear and confusion. I said, "Get on the ground." Jasmine slowly lowered herself to the hardwood floor, sobbing hysterically. "Dad, tell them," she screamed. "Tell them I live here. Tell them it is a mistake." The officer looked up at me, standing on the landing. "Sir, is this woman authorized to be here?" I looked at Jasmine. I looked at the open safe. I looked at the greed that had brought her to this low point. "No, officer," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I have no idea who that woman is anymore. She is an intruder." Arrest her." The officer nodded. He holstered his weapon and pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs. He grabbed Jasmine's wrists and pulled them behind her back. The metallic click of the cuffs locking was the loudest sound in the room. Jasmine wailed, thrashing against the restraint. "Dad, you cannot do this. I am your daughter. Hunter made me do it. He threatened me. Please, Dad, do not let them take me to jail." I walked down the stairs slowly, my hand gripping the railing. I stopped a few feet away from her. I looked down at her tear-stained face. "You made your choice, Jasmine," I said. "You chose a thief over your father. You chose to break into my home. You chose to dishonor your mother's memory by using her birthday as a tool for theft." The officer pulled her to her feet. "We will take her to the county lockup, sir," the officer said. "Do you want to press charges?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Breaking and entering. Attempted grand larceny. Press every charge you can." Jasmine's eyes went wide with horror. "You are going to let me go to prison," she whispered. "I am not letting you go to prison, Jasmine," I replied. "I am sending you to school. You never learned the value of hard work. You never learned the value of loyalty. Maybe a concrete cell will teach you what I could not." I turned my back on her as the officers began to drag her toward the door. "Dad!" she screamed one last time. "Bail me out. Please, just pay the bail." I stopped and looked over my shoulder. "My wallet is closed, Jasmine," I said. "You wanted my money so badly that you were willing to steal it. Now you can sit in a cell and think about what it really costs." I watched them haul her out into the night, the flashing lights painting her white dress in shades of criminal red and blue. I closed the front door and locked it. I was alone again, but this time I did not feel lonely. I felt like a man who had finally done the hardest job of his life. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. The lesson had been delivered. Now it was up to her to learn it. Hunter was watching from the tree line at the edge of my property when they brought Jasmine out in handcuffs. He was hiding in the shadows of the old oak trees like a coyote waiting for a scrap of food. He saw the flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement. He saw his wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, being shoved into the back of a squad car. A real man would have stepped forward. A real man would have taken responsibility for the monster he had created. But Hunter was not a real man. He was a parasite who had lost his host. I saw movement in the bushes as the police cruiser pulled away. I pointed it out to the officer on my porch, but by the time they shone their flashlights into the woods, he was gone. He had run. He had abandoned Jasmine the second she became a liability instead of an asset. He took off into the night on foot, leaving her to face the consequences of his coercion alone. The police issued an immediate bulletin. Hunter Vance was now a fugitive wanted for questioning in connection with the attempted burglary and the massive fraud scheme the SEC was unraveling. He had no money. He had no car. He had no friends. He was a rat cornered in a city he used to think he owned. I went back inside and sat by the window, but I did not sleep. I knew rats were most dangerous when they were starving. I knew he was not done with me. He blamed me for everything. In his twisted mind, I was the reason he was cold and hungry. I was the villain who had ruined his perfect con. The next night, the air was thick and heavy with humidity. I had not turned on a single light in the house. To anyone watching from the street, it looked like the home of an old man who had gone to bed early to escape his grief. But inside the house was awake. I sat in my armchair in the living room, a baseball bat resting against my knee, not because I intended to use it, but because it felt good to have something solid in my hands. I was not alone this time. After Jasmine's arrest, I had called Sarah, my lawyer. She did not just send paperwork, she sent protection. A private investigator named Mike was parked down the street in an unmarked sedan, and another man was stationed in my backyard, blending into the darkness. We knew Hunter would come back. A man like that does not flee the state he tries to destroy the evidence of his failure. Around 3 in the morning, the silence was broken by the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. It was a clumsy sound. Hunter was not a professional criminal. He was just a desperate amateur. I smelled him before I saw him. The sharp chemical stench of gasoline drifted through the cracks of the front door, overpowering the smell of the rain-soaked earth. I moved to the window, peering through the blinds. A figure was moving on my front porch. It was Hunter. He was wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face and carrying a red plastic gas can. He was not just trying to scare me. He was splashing gasoline onto the wooden siding of the house I had built with my own 2 hands. He was pouring it over the front steps where Jasmine had begged for money just 24 hours earlier. He wanted to burn it all down. He wanted to burn me down with it. This was not just vandalism. This was an execution. I watched him fumble in his pocket, his hands shaking violently. He pulled out a silver lighter, the expensive kind he used to light cigars when he was playing the big shot. He flicked the lid open. The flame sparked to life, a tiny orange dancer in the darkness. Hunter's face was illuminated for a second. He looked deranged. His eyes were wide and hollow, his teeth bared in a rictus of hate. He raised the lighter, ready to drop it into the pool of gasoline at his feet, ready to turn my legacy into ash. But the fire never fell. Before he could let go, a dark shape tackled him from the side. It was the man from the backyard. He hit Hunter with the force of a freight train, driving him off the porch and onto the wet grass. The lighter flew from Hunter's hand, landing harmlessly in a puddle of mud where it hissed and died. Mike, the investigator, sprinted up the driveway, his flashlight cutting through the night, blinding Hunter, who was now writhing on the ground, pinned under the weight of the security agent. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the gas-soaked porch. The fumes were dizzying. I looked down at the man who had tried to kill me. Hunter was screaming obscenities, thrashing and spitting like a rabid animal. "Get off me!" he yelled. "I will kill you! I will kill all of you!" I walked down the steps, carefully avoiding the slick spots. I stood over him. He looked up at me, and for a second the screaming stopped. He saw that I was not afraid. He saw that I had been waiting for him. "You missed a spot, Hunter," I said, quietly, pointing to a dry patch on the railing. "If you are going to do a job, do it right. Or do not do it at all." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder every second. Mike had called them the moment Hunter stepped onto the property. This time, there would be no bail. This time, there would be no way out. Attempted arson. Attempted murder. The charges were piling up like bricks in a wall that would keep him enclosed for a very long time. The police cars screeched to a halt in front of my house, turning the night into a disco of red and blue. They hauled Hunter up from the grass. He was crying now, the rage replaced by the terrifying reality of his future. I watched them shove him into the back of the car. He looked at me through the window, his face pressed against the glass. I did not look away. I watched until the car disappeared around the corner, taking the last piece of the rot away from my life. I turned back to my house. It smelled like gas, but it was still standing. It was strong, just like me. I walked into the county detention center on a Tuesday morning. The air inside smelled of bleach and stale bodies, a scent that sticks to your clothes long after you leave. I sat on a metal stool in the visitation room waiting for my number to be called. When they finally brought Jasmine out, my heart cracked a little more. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair, which she used to spend hundreds of dollars styling, was pulled back in a messy knot. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. She did not look like the arrogant woman who had sneered at me on her wedding day. She looked like a frightened child who had lost her way in the dark. She sat down on the other side of the thick plexiglass partition. She did not pick up the phone at first. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and lingering defiance. She was still waiting for me to fix it. She was still waiting for her father to pull out a checkbook and make the bad men go away. I picked up the receiver. She slowly did the same. "You look tired, Jasmine," I said. My voice was not angry. It was just tired. She let out a shaky breath. "Get me out of here, Dad," she whispered. "Please. I cannot stay here. The women in here are crazy. I am scared." I looked at her and shook my head. "I cannot get you out, Jasmine. You broke the law. But I came because we need to finish the conversation we started in the living room, the one about your mother." Jasmine's face hardened instantly. The fear was replaced by that familiar flash of anger. "Do not talk about Mom," she snapped. "You lost the right to talk about her when you let her die to save a few dollars. You let her suffer because you were too cheap to pay for the good doctors." "I know the truth, Dad. I remember the arguments." I reached into my jacket pocket. I did not pull out a wallet. I pulled out a small, worn book bound in cracked red leather. It was Lucille's diary. I had kept it in my bedside drawer for 10 years, unable to read it without weeping. But today, I had brought it into the light. I pressed it against the glass so she could see the handwriting. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. Jasmine squinted. It is Mom's, she said, her voice wavering. I opened the book to a page marked with a black ribbon. October 14th, 2010. I began to read aloud, my voice echoing in the small booth. The doctor told me today that the cancer is aggressive. He said there is a treatment, a new protocol in Switzerland. It costs $200,000. Thaddeus wants to sell the house. He wants to sell the business. He wants to sell everything to send me there. But I said no. I looked up at Jasmine. She was staring at the book, her mouth slightly open. I continued reading. I said no because that money is for Jasmine. That is her tuition for the private university. That is her living expenses, so she never has to work a waitressing job like I did. If I spend that money on a treatment that might not work, I am stealing her future. I would rather die knowing she is safe than live knowing I left her with nothing. Thaddeus begged me on his knees today. He cried like a baby. But I made him promise. I made him swear on our marriage that he would keep the money for her. I flipped the page. November 2nd. The pain is bad today. Thaddeus sold his wedding ring. He told me he lost it on a job site, but I saw the pawn shop receipt in the trash. He bought me the good morphine, the kind insurance does not cover. He is working double shifts just to keep the lights on because I forbade him from touching the college fund. He is a good man. He is the strongest man I know. He is letting me die because I asked him to. He is carrying this burden so our daughter can fly. I closed the book. My hand was trembling. Jasmine was frozen. Her face was pale as a sheet. You thought I was cheap, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You thought I was a miser. I was broke, Jasmine. I was broke because I was funneling every spare dime into an account with your name on it. I wore holes in my boots so you could wear designer heels. I ate beans and rice so you could eat sushi. And when your mother was screaming in pain in the middle of the night, I held her hand and I prayed for forgiveness because I was respecting her dying wish. I was saving you. I watched the realization hit her. It was like a physical blow. The narrative she had built her entire life around the story that justified her hatred and her greed shattered into a million pieces. She looked at me, and for the first time she saw the truth. She saw the sacrifice. She saw the love that was so fierce it had endured her hatred for a decade. No, she whimpered. No, that is not true. You are lying. It is in her own hand, Jasmine, I said, holding the book up again. You killed her, she whispered, but the conviction was gone. No, Jasmine, I said softly. She gave her life for you, and you took that sacrifice, and you threw it in the mud for a man who left you to rot in a jail cell. Jasmine let out a sound that was not human. It was a wail of pure soul-crushing agony. She slid out of her chair. She fell to the dirty linoleum floor of the visitation booth. She curled into a ball, her forehead pressing against the cold metal beneath the shelf. She was sobbing so hard her whole body shook. The guard stepped forward, looking concerned, but I held up a hand. Let her cry. She needs this. She pulled herself up slowly until she was on her knees. She pressed her hands against the glass partition. Her face was wet with tears and snot, her eyes red and swollen. Dad, she choked out. Dad, I am so sorry. Oh God, I am so sorry. I did not know. I did not know. She pressed her forehead against the glass as if she was trying to push through it to get to me. I am a monster, she sobbed. I treated you like garbage. I stole from you. And you were the only one who ever really loved me. Please, Dad. Please forgive me. I will do anything. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just please do not hate me. I looked at my daughter on her knees in an orange jumpsuit broken by the weight of the truth. I placed my hand on the glass directly over hers. The barrier was there, thick and unyielding, but the connection was back. It was faint and damaged, but it was there. I do not hate you, Jasmine, I said, my voice quiet. I could never hate you. You are my daughter. But forgiveness is not a word. It is an action. You have a long road ahead of you. You have to serve your time. You have to pay your debts. But you finally know the truth. And the truth is the only place we can start to build. She nodded frantically, her forehead still pressed against my hand through the glass. I will, Dad. I promise. I will make you proud again. I will make Mom proud. I stood up. The visit was over. I picked up the diary and put it back in my pocket next to my heart. I walked to the door. I looked back one last time. She was still on her knees, watching me leave, her eyes filled with a pain that was finally real. It was the hardest thing I had ever done leaving her there, but I knew she was safer in that cell with the truth than she had ever been in that penthouse with a lie. The courtroom was a theater of the absurd, packed tight with reporters who smelled blood and former investors who wanted their pound of flesh. Hunter sat at the defense table looking like a king holding court rather than a criminal facing justice. He had traded his torn tuxedo for a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my truck. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his chin held high in a pose of misunderstood nobility. He whispered to his lawyer, a man named Sterling, who was known for turning sharks into goldfish. Sterling stood up and paced before the jury, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He painted a picture that made my stomach turn. He described Hunter as a visionary, a genius boy, wonder who had flown too close to the sun because he was trying to satisfy the insatiable greed of a woman. He pointed at the empty chair where Jasmine should have been. He called her a siren. He claimed she demanded the penthouse, the cars, the vacations. He said Hunter broke the law only because he was a man desperately in love trying to keep a high-maintenance woman happy. Hunter wiped a fake tear from his eye looking at the jury with the face of a martyr. He was not defending himself. He was sacrificing his wife. He was building a life raft out of her reputation and climbing on top of it to stay dry. It was a masterclass in narcissism. He smirked at me when the lawyer turned his back, a tiny fleeting expression that said he thought he was going to win. He thought he could charm his way out of a federal indictment just like he charmed his way into my daughter's life. Then it was my turn. The bailiff called my name and I walked to the stand. I did not look at Hunter. I looked at the jury. They were regular people, a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, people who worked for a living, people who understood the value of $1. Sterling tried to rattle me during cross-examination. He asked if I was a bitter father. He asked if I was jealous of Hunter's education. He tried to paint me as an angry blue-collar worker with a grudge against the upper class. I let him talk. I let him spin his web. And then I opened my mouth. I did not use big words. I used facts. I pulled out the binder Sarah and I had compiled. It was 3 inches thick and heavy with the weight of Hunter's sins. I walked the jury through the timeline. I showed them the bank transfer from Mrs. Higgins, a retired schoolteacher who lost her life savings of $80,000. I showed them the timestamp, 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. Then I showed them the credit card charge at 2:00 p.m. that same day, $80,000 for a diamond engagement ring. I looked at the jury and I told them the truth. Jasmine did not ask for that ring. She did not even know Mrs. Higgins existed. Hunter bought that ring to buy Jasmine's trust. He stole from a grandmother to groom a wife. I turned the page. I showed them the investment from a local bakery owner, $50,000 for a tech platform that did not exist. The next day, a down payment on the G-Wagon. I explained how Hunter used these gifts as props. He dressed Jasmine up like a doll, not because he loved her, but because she was part of the con. A beautiful wife in expensive clothes made him look successful. It made investors trust him. She was not his partner in crime. She was his billboard. I read the emails. I had subpoenaed emails where Hunter mocked Jasmine to his frat brothers, calling her easy to manipulate, calling her his ticket to credibility. The courtroom was silent. The sound of Hunter's pen tapping on the table stopped. His face drained of color. I had stripped away his mask. I showed the world that he was not a victim of love. He was a predator who used everyone he touched. Jasmine was guilty of being vain. She was guilty of being weak, but she was not the architect. He was. The jury did not need long. They came back after lunch. The foreman stood up and read the verdict with a voice that did not waver. Guilty. On all counts. Wire fraud. Securities fraud. Money laundering. The judge, a woman who had no patience for men who preyed on the vulnerable, looked at Hunter over her glasses. She sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. No parole. She ordered full restitution to the victims. Hunter screamed. The arrogance finally broke. He wailed like a child as the marshals dragged him away, his expensive suit bunching up as he fought against the handcuffs. He looked at me one last time, his eyes wide with terror, but I felt nothing. He was already a ghost. Then they brought Jasmine in for her sentencing. She was part of a separate plea deal because of my testimony and her cooperation. She stood before the judge in her orange jumpsuit, her head bowed. She looked small. The judge spoke to her sternly. She acknowledged that Jasmine was manipulated, but she also held her accountable for her own greed and the burglary she attempted at my house. The judge sentenced her to 5 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. She avoided prison time. but the gavel strike still echoed like a gunshot. She was now a convicted felon. The stain was permanent. Her background checks would always show this moment. She could never work in a bank. She could never handle sensitive data. The corporate career she had dreamed of was over before it began. She walked out of the courtroom a free woman, but she carried a heavy chain. She looked across the aisle at me. Her eyes were red. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for a ride. She just nodded a slow, humble acknowledgement of the second chance she had been given. She walked out the heavy doors alone into a world where she would have to rebuild her name from scratch brick by brick, just like her father. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Jasmine showed up at my front gate carrying a plastic bag with her personal effects, the only luggage she had left in the world. Her Mercedes was gone, repossessed by the dealership, and her penthouse was a memory. She looked like a ghost of the girl who had stood in that ballroom wearing a dress worth more than my truck. She walked up the driveway, her eyes fixed on the front door as if it were the gates of heaven. She reached for the handle, assuming it would be unlocked, assuming that after the storm the harbor would be open for her to sail back in. But the door was locked tight. I opened it before she could knock, standing in the frame and filling the space with my body. She tried to step past me, her body language automatic, assuming she could just slide back into her old room and hide from the world until the bruises on her ego healed. "Dad," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "I am so tired. Can I just go lie down?" I did not move. I blocked her path like a stone wall built to withstand a hurricane. "No, Jasmine," I said, my voice low and firm. "You cannot come in." She looked up at me, confused hurt flashing in her eyes like a struck dog. "But where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "I have nowhere. I have no money. I have no husband. I am your daughter. You have to take me in." I looked at her at the lines of exhaustion etched into her young face. It would be so easy to let her in. It would be so easy to make her hot soup and tuck her into bed and tell her everything would be all right. But that would be a lie, and it would be the worst thing I could do for her. "If I let you in now, Jasmine," I said, "I will be robbing you again. I will be robbing you of the chance to save yourself. You burned this house down with your choices. You cannot live in the ashes." Jasmine stared at me, her mouth trembling. "Are you punishing me?" she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "Is this because of the wedding? Is this because of the money?" "No," I said, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me with a final click. "This is not punishment. This is love. Real love. The kind that hurts both of us but heals the wound instead of just covering it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I handed it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing against my rough skin. "What is this?" she asked, unfolding it. "It is an address," I said. "Mrs. Higgins. The woman Hunter stole from owns a boarding house on the south side. She has a room. It is small. It smells like cabbage and old floor wax. But it is clean and it is cheap. I paid the first month rent. After that, it is on you." Jasmine looked at the address, her nose wrinkling slightly, a reflex she could not control even in her desperation. And below that, I continued, pointing to the bottom of the page. "That is the address of a diner downtown. The owner is an old friend of mine. He needs a dishwasher. It pays minimum wage plus tips if you bus tables. He is expecting you at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Dishwasher." She repeated the word, tasting like vinegar in her mouth. "Dad, I have a degree in marketing. I cannot wash dishes." "You have a felony record, Jasmine," I reminded her, my voice hard. "You have a reputation for fraud. You are not a marketing executive right now. You are a woman who needs to eat. You need to learn what a dollar actually weighs. You need to feel the soap burn your hands. You need to stand on your feet until they scream. You need to understand where I came from so you can figure out where you are going. I forgive you, Jasmine. I forgive you for everything. But I cannot carry you anymore. You have to walk on your own 2 feet." Jasmine looked at the paper, then at me. She looked at the house, the comfortable middle-class safety she had taken for granted her entire life. She looked at the street where she had no car waiting, just a long walk to a bus stop. She took a deep breath. It was a shaky, ragged sound, but it was the sound of air filling lungs that had been holding it for too long. She nodded. She did not scream. She did not beg. She folded the paper carefully and put it in her pocket. "Okay," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Okay, Dad." She turned around and walked down the steps. She did not look back. She walked down the driveway past the mailbox and turned left toward the bus stop. I watched her go until she was just a speck in the distance. The next morning I drove past the diner. I parked across the street and watched through the plate glass window. I saw her. She was wearing a white apron that was too big for her, tied tight around her waist. Her hair was pulled back in a net. She was scraping leftovers off a plate, her face grimacing slightly at the smell of cold eggs and ketchup. She looked miserable. She looked exhausted. But she was there. She was working. She was earning her first honest dollar. She scrubbed a plate, rinsing it with the sprayer. Then she scrubbed another, and another. She was starting from the bottom, from a place lower than zero. But she was starting. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. She was not a princess anymore. She was becoming a person. The for sale sign went up in the front yard on a Thursday morning. I hammered it into the ground myself the same way I had hammered every nail into the framing of that house 40 years ago. It felt like driving a stake into the heart of a ghost. For decades, that house had been the center of my universe. It was where I brought Lucille home when we got married. It was where we raised Jasmine. It was where I nursed my wife until she took her last breath. But walking through the empty rooms after Jasmine left, I realized something terrifying. It was not a home anymore. It was a museum of sacrifices. Every corner held a memory of something I had given up. The kitchen where I ate cheap meals so my family could feast. The living room where I sat alone while they went on vacations I paid for but did not attend. I had spent my entire life being a provider, a protector, a wallet, and a shield. I had defined myself by who I was to other people. Thaddeus the husband, Thaddeus the father, Thaddeus the builder. I did not know who Thaddeus the man was. I had lived for everyone else for so long that I had forgotten to live for myself. I sold the house to a young couple with a baby on the way. They walked through the rooms with wide eyes, touching the walls with reverence. They saw a future where I only saw a past. When I handed over the keys, I did not look back. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden I had not realized I was carrying until it was gone. I deposited the check into my account, adding to the fortune that nobody knew about, and I drove away. I was homeless by choice, and for the first time in 71 years, I was completely free. I traded the stationary life for a mobile one. I went to a luxury dealership and bought a 45-foot Class A motorhome. It was a beast of a machine with heated floors, marble countertops, and an engine that purred like a jungle cat. It was bigger than my first apartment. I joined a caravan club for retired singles people who had decided that they were not done living just because their hair was gray. Our first stop was the Grand Canyon. I was sitting outside my rig one evening watching the sun paint the canyon walls in shades of fire and bruised purple when a woman walked over from the campsite next door. Her name was Clara. She was 68 years old, a retired history teacher with laugh lines etched deep around her eyes and hair the color of spun silver. She was holding a bottle of wine and 2 plastic cups. She did not ask me what I did for a living. She did not ask me how much money I had. She just asked if I wanted a drink and some company. We sat by the fire for hours. She told me about her late husband, a firefighter who died in the line of duty 20 years ago. She told me about her travels, about how she decided to see every national park in the country before she died. She had a spirit that was infectious, a curiosity about the world that I had let die in myself years ago. She did not look at me with pity or greed. She looked at me like I was interesting. She looked at me like I was a man worth knowing. We traveled together for the next 3 months. We drove through the deserts of Arizona and the forests of Oregon. We parked our rigs side by side every night, creating a little neighborhood of 2 wherever we went. It was a slow burn, a quiet comfort that grew into something I had not felt since Lucille was young. One night we were parked on a beach in California, watching the waves crash against the shore. We were trying to cook lobsters on a portable grill, but the wind kept blowing the flame out. I was getting frustrated, my old instincts to fix everything kicking in, but Clara just started laughing. It was a bright, clear sound that cut through my irritation. She grabbed a lobster claw and started dancing around the grill, waving it like a conductor's baton, singing an opera song off-key. I looked at her, this beautiful, crazy woman dancing in the sand, and something inside me cracked open. A sound bubbled up from my chest, rusty and unused. It started as a chuckle, and then it grew. I started laughing. I laughed until my sides hurt. I laughed until tears ran down my face. I laughed for the wedding that was ruined. I laughed for the house that was sold. I laughed for the years I spent being serious and stoic. It was a cleansing rain washing away a decade of dust. Clara stopped dancing and looked at me, a smile lighting up her face. "There he is," she said softly. "I was wondering when Thaddeus would show up." I reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm against mine. "I am here, Clara," I said, squeezing her fingers. "I am finally here." And in that moment, under the vast expanse of the starlit sky, I knew that my life was not over. It was just beginning. It had been exactly 365 days since I watched my daughter walk away from my house with nothing but a slip of paper and the clothes on her back. I had kept tabs on her from a distance. I knew she did not stay a dishwasher for long. She worked double shifts covering for anyone who called in sick. She learned every station in the kitchen and every table in the front of the house. Now she was the manager of that same diner downtown. I parked my truck across the street and watched her through the plate glass window. She looked different. The soft, pampered girl who used to spend hundreds on facials was gone. In her place was a woman who looked 10 years older than her actual age. There were fine lines etched around her eyes from squinting at order tickets under fluorescent lights. There were dark circles under her eyes from opening the store at 5 in the morning every single day. Her hands, once perfectly manicured, were now rough and red with short, practical nails that had seen hard labor. She moved with a purpose I had never seen before. She was not floating through life expecting doors to open for her. She was kicking them open herself. I watched her deal with a difficult customer, calming him down with a firm but polite authority that reminded me of myself on a job site. She was not wearing designer clothes anymore. She was wearing a simple black uniform, trousers, and a button-down shirt, but she wore it with more dignity than she ever wore that wedding dress. She had lost everything material, but she had gained something far more valuable. She had gained a spine. She had learned that respect is not something you buy. It is something you earn every single day when your feet hurt and your back aches and you keep going anyway. She was tired, she was worn down, but her eyes were clear. They were the eyes of someone who finally knew who she was. When she called to invite me to dinner, her voice was steady. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for a favor. She just asked for my time. She told me she wanted to take me out. Not to a fancy 5-star restaurant where they charge you for the air you breathe, but to a nice family steakhouse where the portions were big and the atmosphere was warm. I brought Clara with me. I was nervous. I did not know how Jasmine would react to seeing another woman by my side, especially a white woman, given the lies Hunter had fed her about my prejudices. But when we walked in, Jasmine stood up immediately. She did not sneer. She did not roll her eyes. She smiled a genuine, tired smile. She extended her hand to Clara and said, "It is so nice to meet you. Thank you for making my father happy." We sat down and ordered. The conversation was easy. We talked about her work, about the crazy customers, about the leaking roof she had fixed herself in her rental. When the check came, I reached for my wallet out of habit. It was a reflex born of decades of being the provider, the one who solved every problem with a card. But Jasmine reached out and gently stopped my hand. "No, Dad," she said firmly. "This is on me. I earned this." She pulled out a worn leather wallet, not a designer clutch, and paid with cash. Small bills, tips she had saved, money she had sweated for. I watched her count it out. It was not a black card. It was not a wire transfer. It was real money. And in that moment, that pile of crumpled bills looked more beautiful to me than a $1 million check. She looked at me and said, "I wanted to show you that I can stand on my own 2 feet. I am not rich, Dad. I am barely making it. But I am making it. And I am doing it honestly." We walked out to the parking lot, the cool night air wrapping around us. I knew I had to tell her the rest. I had to tell her about the future so there would be no secrets between us. "Jasmine," I said, leaning against my truck, "I need you to know something about the estate, about the money I have left." She looked at me, waiting. I did not see greed in her eyes anymore, just patience. I set up a trust, I continued. "It is called the Lucille Coleman Foundation. It is dedicated to helping single mothers get vocational training so they can build their own lives. Almost all of my assets are going into it. When I pass, you will not get a lump sum. You will not be an heiress. You will get a small monthly stipend, enough to keep you from starving, but not enough to stop you from working. The rest belongs to the foundation." I waited for the anger. I waited for the accusation that I was robbing her again. But it never came. Jasmine looked at me, and then she looked at Clara, and then she looked at the sky. She took a deep breath and smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "That is good, Dad," she said softly. "That is really good. Mom would have loved that." She would have wanted to help people like me, people who needed a second chance. I do not want your millions anymore, Dad. I do not want the burden of it. I like knowing that what I have is mine. I like knowing that nobody can take it away from me because I built it myself. You do good with that money. Save someone else. I already saved myself. She hugged me then. It was not a hug asking for something. It was just a hug. And as she drove away in her used Honda Civic, I knew that the daughter I thought I lost was finally found. Hunter Vance was learning a new trade in federal prison Block D, and it was not fintech. He was pushing a mop bucket across the gray concrete floor, the water sloshing over the sides and soaking into his canvas shoes that were a far cry from the Italian leather loafers he used to wear. His face was a map of bad decisions. There was a fresh purple bruise blooming on his left cheekbone, and his lip was split in the corner, a receipt for a debt he could not pay. In here, his charm was worthless. The men he lived with did not care about his credit score or his imaginary connections to senators. They only cared about commissary credits and respect, and Hunter had neither. He paused to wipe the sweat from his forehead, his hands trembling slightly. He looked toward the corner of the day room where a group of men were playing cards. One of them, a massive man with tattoos covering his neck, looked up and locked eyes with him. Hunter flinched and looked down at his mop water, quickly resuming his scrubbing. He owed 3 cartons of cigarettes to that table. It was a debt that kept growing with interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. He was tired, he was hungry, he was scared. The arrogance that had defined him, the belief that he was smarter than everyone else, had been beaten out of him one night at a time. He realized now that the penthouse and the cars and the parties were just a dream he had stolen, and now he was waking up in a nightmare he had built for himself. He looked at the reflection in the dirty water. He did not see a CEO. He saw a con man who had conned himself right into a cage. There was no way out. There was no one coming to save him. He was finally paying the bill, and the currency was his life. 500 miles away, the world was wide open and painted in shades of burnt orange and gold. I sat behind the wheel of my 45-foot motorhome, the engine humming a low, steady rhythm that vibrated through the floorboards. Beside me, Clara had her feet propped up on the dashboard, a map spread out on her lap even though the GPS was running. She preferred the paper maps, she said, because they smelled like adventure. We were driving along the rim of the Grand Canyon, the sun dipping low on the horizon, setting the rock formations on fire with light. I looked out at the vast expanse of the earth, the deep crevices and the towering peaks, and I felt a peace so deep it settled in my bones. For 71 years, I had been anchored to one spot, anchored by duty, anchored by the need to build and protect. Now the anchor was pulled up. The wind coming through the open window tasted of sagebrush and freedom. I looked over at Clara. She caught my eye and smiled, reaching out to squeeze my hand on the steering wheel. We did not need to talk. We understood each other in the quiet spaces. We were 2 people who had finished our work and were now enjoying the reward. We were heading west toward the Pacific Ocean, a body of water I had never seen with my own eyes. I thought about the house I sold. I thought about the bricks I laid. They seemed like a lifetime ago. I was not Thaddeus the builder anymore. I was Thaddeus the traveler. I was Thaddeus the man who finally learned that the best foundation you can build is a life you actually want to live. I thought about that night at the hotel often. I thought about the moment I turned my back on my daughter and walked away. It was the hardest thing a father can do. It goes against every instinct in your blood. You want to shield them. You want to cushion their fall. You want to give them the world on a silver platter. But I realized something out here on the open road. Love is not about making things easy. Love is about making things real. If I had paid for that wedding, if I had let them stay in that penthouse, I would have been an accomplice to their destruction. I would have been feeding the very sickness that was killing my daughter's soul. By taking everything away, I gave her the only thing that mattered. I gave her a chance to find herself. Do not ever let your love become a weakness. Do not let your generosity become a crutch. You can build a house for your children, but you cannot live in it for them. You can buy them a boat, but you cannot row it for them. And you certainly cannot give them a fish every single day and expect them to survive when you are gone. You have to teach them to fish. You have to hand them the pole, even if it is heavy, even if the line gets tangled, even if they complain that it is too hard. Because one day, the storm will come and you will not be there to hold the umbrella. They have to know how to stand in the rain. They have to know that their value does not come from a bank account or a last name. It comes from what they can build with their own two hands. I looked at the road stretching out ahead of us, a ribbon of asphalt leading into the future. I shifted gears and pressed the gas. The fish was worth a fortune, but the lesson was priceless. I am Thaddeus Coleman, and my work here is done. This journey taught me that the most dangerous thing a parent can do is cushion every fall. By cutting Jasmine off, I did not abandon her. I liberated her from the prison of entitlement. True wealth is not found in a bank account or a brand name. It is forged in the fires of struggle and self-reliance. Sometimes to save your child, you have to be the villain in their story. Real love is not about giving them what they want. It is about ensuring they have what they need to survive without you character, grit, and dignity. If you agree that respect must be earned, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice.